word on this thing. Fantastic.
And then maybe pin our screen,
So what?
pin our screen, so when you watch it again, you can see like us instead of this girl's name.
Something wrong with Tina's name?
I just feel like it would be less helpful afterwards if you can.
Yes. I'll pin it.
Okay, great.
Fantastic.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good. No one worry about interrupting. It's totally fine. Are there any questions about the club in general, about what kind of meetings we do, about anything we can offer before we go into the actual speaker event? Fantastic. So I did good describing it. All right. So our first speaker is Mr. William Fischbach. That's how you pronounce it, right? Fischbach?
Correct.
Fantastic. So he is currently commercial civil litigation, right?
Correct.
And he was previously in the Army JAG Corps. Received the rank of major, right? Before you went out. Fantastic. And well, I'm not going to tell your life story. That's what you're here for. But we're all very excited to have him. He's come to a few events in the past with our club, and we're excited to have him back. So if you want to go ahead and give your presentation, and then
Thank you.
what we typically do after the speaker is we open it up for questions from everyone. So feel free to ask whatever you'd like about law in general or your own experience and whatever you're curious about.
Well, thank you very much. Excuse me if I flout the university's mask policy, but they can kick you guys out. They can't do anything to me. And I think they like cashing my donation checks even more. One, I'm flattered that you chose me to be the speaker at kind of your initial event for the year. My name is Will Fischbach. I'm an equity partner at the law firm of Tiffany & Bosco. Tiffany & Bosco, we're about 130 attorneys nationwide, 60 of which are here in our Phoenix office, which is kind of the flagship office, if you will. And I practice in a wide variety of civil and commercial litigation matters. I've got 4 attorneys that work for me. I've got a team of 4 paralegals as well. So we're able to tackle cases of all shapes and sizes. I am also a proud ASU Sun Devil alumni. I went here for undergrad. I grew up in Southern California and came out here for college in 1990, believe it or not. Graduated in 1994 in the 4.5-year plan. And then I wanted to go someplace really different for law school, and I went to Tulane University. Tulane is in the great city of New Orleans, Louisiana. Has anybody ever been to New Orleans? It's a wonderful city. If you have any city you want to visit in the US that's on your bucket list, I would hope you would include New Orleans on that list. It's just an incredible amalgam of European and American culture. The food is incredible. The music's incredible. It doesn't have to be during Mardi Gras, but you'll have a heck of a lot of fun if you do go during Mardi Gras. And it's the only school in the nation that gives an extra spring break for Mardi Gras that I'm aware of. So went there for my law degree, and I got my business degree there as well. And my first job as an attorney was in the United States Army. And a lot of people say, why the Army? This article here, this ran, I think, was it last year in Attorney at Law magazine, has a little bit of the background there. But I come from a family of veterans. My grandfather was a Navy doctor in both World War II and the Korean War. My father was a counterintelligence officer during the Vietnam War, and I say during because he actually never went to Vietnam. He was here stateside doing what the Army really can't do anymore, which is conduct surveillance on American citizens. Thank God they can't do it, but he served in counterintelligence during the Vietnam War, and so it seemed like a logical choice in a lot of ways. What the JAG Corps offers, and that's the JAG Corps for all 4 branches, 5 if you count the Coast Guard, is wonderful experience, both in terms of litigation and more importantly, in terms of leadership. And I think leadership, particularly with where I'm at my firm these days, I'm less of a lawyer these days and more of a leader, given the position that I occupy within the firm. So I swore into active duty, I believe, January 7th of 2000. And I wanted to go someplace really interesting. And so I picked as my first duty assignment, Korea. Anybody ever been to Korea or from Korea? Were you in Seoul or?
Yeah, Seoul.
Okay. Did you serve in the military?
I was in the Marines.
Okay. wrong. So were you actually in Seoul? Because there's only like a handful of Marines in.
We just did some training over there.
Yeah. So yeah, the armistice agreement with North Korea would only allow a certain number of Marines in country at any given time. And so if you were a Marine there for training, you were there like on some kind of like funky temporary duty basis. And there were only like 20 or so, I think, full-time Marines in Korea. The Marines really scared the heck out of the North Koreans. So I went there in 2000, you know, like a lot of these jobs you don't start doing the really sexy and interesting things. I started helping out soldiers with things like, you know, divorce and consumer protection issues. I ran a tax center there. I got tax returns filed for something like 20,000 service members there in Seoul. That was before there was kind of the big drawdown of the armed forces there in Seoul about 10 years later. But back then it was a big operation, and we were right there in the middle of the city. I had an apartment in Seoul in kind of the area called Itaewon-dong, which is kind of where a lot of the expats are. It was a lot of fun. It was rewarding professionally, but it was also really enjoyable to immerse myself in another culture for a year. You know, it's one thing to go someplace for a week or 2 weeks or something like that, but living someplace for an extended period of time, you learn not only a lot about that culture, but it kind of helps you put a lot of things in a better perspective once you come back home. After Korea, I wanted to become a paratrooper. I wanted to be in the airborne, so I went to jump school. It's 3 weeks at Fort Benning, Georgia. And then I went to the 18th Airborne Corps, which is at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Now, a lot of people would say, well, why would you as the lawyer ever need to jump out of a perfectly good airplane? And the reason is because lawyers figure a lot more intricately into battlefield operations than you might expect. Certainly not at the kind of the door kicking level, but at the headquarters level, lawyers are very important members of the command staff. In 1987, the Marines, as well as elements of the Ranger Battalion and the 82nd Airborne Division, jumped into Panama. And there was a lawyer on that jump. He was the staff judge advocate of the 82nd Airborne Division. And he was on the ground for 5 minutes before he got his first legal question. And the question was, the Panamanian Army had a bunch of Huey helicopters, the old UH-1H Iroquois that they basically purchased from the US military. And there were people in the division that knew how to fly them. And the question was, hey, can we take these Panamanian helicopters and use them? They're just sitting here, they're in great condition, they're fueled up. And you know what the answer was? There was a very legal answer to it under the Geneva Conventions. And the answer is you had to remove all the markings of the Panamanian Army and write a big US on there to make sure that it wasn't confused with, so that we weren't portraying ourselves as something other than the US Armed Forces. So that was the legal question, and that was the answer that only the lawyer could deliver. So I go to jump school. I get to Fort Bragg, I think June, July of 2001. And we all know what happened on September 11th, 2001. I went home that day and I started, packing what's called my TA-50, which is my stuff, so to speak, because I knew sooner or later I was going somewhere. I wasn't sure where, but I knew I was going to go somewhere. At the time, I was the operational law attorney for 18th Airborne Corps, that's the law of war, Geneva Conventions, kind of some of those more heady legal issues. And the first person to go over with the task force in October of 2001 was my then boss, a guy named Major John Crocker. Major Crocker was there for 2 weeks before he got fired. He pissed off the commander of the 5th Special Forces Group, Colonel John Mulholland, and he was sent packing. So when your boss gets fired in the Army, guess what happens? You go in his or her place. So November of 2001, I'm on a C-130, or actually a C-17 to, at the time, Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is where we kind of fought the war for the most part, at least the Afghanistan war, probably at least until February of 2002. And the reason is logistics. The U.S. military, its might is based almost entirely on logistics. We have the best troops, we have the best training, but unless you have food, fuel, ammunition, things to sustain those troops, they're not going to be effective for very long. What Uzbekistan offered specifically, it was an old Soviet airfield in a place called Karshi-Khanabad, Uzbekistan. We call it K2. There was a railhead nearby, so you could bring in supplies from Europe, both Western and Eastern Europe. The airfield there at K2 it was in good enough condition that it could withstand a C-17 landing. The C-17 is a cargo airplane used by the U.S. Air Force. It's not the biggest one. The biggest one's the C-5, but it's the second biggest one. And what could happen then is you could then put supplies on smaller cargo aircraft called C-130s, and then you could fly them down to parts in Afghanistan. Or more frequently, what we did is we just put it on the back of tractor trailer trucks, and they would drive through a little town called Mazar-e-Sharif on the border there, kind of go through their mountain pass and make their way to either Kandahar or Bagram airfield. About 70% of the stuff on the long trucks made it, but all things considered, that wasn't a bad ratio. But that's why we fought the war from K2 for the first 5 or 6 months. And that was everybody. That was 5th Special Forces Group, Delta Force, 10th Mountain Division. Later, we pushed further into Afghanistan, specifically a place called Bagram Airfield, which until recently was kind of probably the biggest base that there was there in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, I did a wide variety of things. I did some military justice issues. I did some administrative law issues. There's kind of a joke I make in this article about a general wanting to lease a fleet of Turkish SUVs and being told they can't do that. I had to tell a general that once. They wanted to lease a fleet of Forerunners out of Turkey and get them through Uzbekistan and down into Afghanistan. And if you're familiar with congressional appropriations law, that's what's called a capital lease. And Congress frowns upon those things. So fiscal law, operational law, a little bit of military justice. And in many respects, I was kind of like the general counsel for the command there. I stayed there for about 8 months. We later found out that the base was contaminated both with radioactive material and the remnants of chemical weapons, specifically sarin nerve gas, which made a little of us, or some of us, pretty upset, but so far so good. I haven't had any adverse reactions from that. Go back to Fort Bragg, and then I took my first full-time litigation job, which was as a defense attorney at the 82nd Airborne Division. Again, the best thing about the JAG Corps in any one of the branches, but particularly I think the Army and I think the Marine Corps as well, is that they kind of put you in the mix right away. It wasn't long before I was trying homicide cases, sexual assault cases, drug cases, in addition to the usual kind of military stuff like AWOL and people doing drugs and stuff like that. But if you want tangible courtroom experience right away, the JAG Corps is a wonderful way to do that. So I do that for 2 years, and then I go to the 101st Airborne Division, which that's kind of the division nearest and dearest to my heart. Anybody seen Saving Private Ryan? And that's Private Ryan's division, is the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles as they're called. And I was the chief prosecutor for the 101st Airborne Division. And in addition, I also went to Air Assault School, which is, instead of jumping out of airplanes, you're rappelling out of helicopters, and then Pathfinder School, which is where you learn how to be the first person on the ground so that people can then come in via parachute in helicopters. As the chief prosecutor, again, I was trying cases of all shapes and sizes. I was teaching other attorneys how to try cases. And then our Iraq rotation came up in 2005. Went to Iraq in October of 2005, I believe. Went initially to a place called Contingency Operating Base Spiker, or Cobb Spiker, which is just outside of Tikrit, Iraq. I floated around the country quite a bit, to include Mosul and a town called Talafar, because in addition to my job as the chief prosecutor, one of my jobs was to get the Iraqi judges and police officers to work better together. The Iraqi justice system more or less functioned. If a taxi driver ran over a little girl in the middle of the street, they have prosecutors and defense attorneys and judges that could handle something like that. Where it tended to break down was with what I would call kind of the terrorist cases. Somebody sets off a bomb in the middle of a town square, kills 50 people. Even if you've caught them red-handed, well, that person has a brother or a cousin. And if you lock the bad guy up, you're the judge or the prosecutor, well, their brother or their cousin's going to meet you at your house that night, and they probably already have your wife and kids tied up, and maybe their heads are still attached to their body, and maybe they're not. The other, I think, challenge we had with the Iraqi police and judges was that the judges were typically Sunni Muslim, and the police were kind of more blue collar and therefore typically Shia Muslim. And the kind of the schism between Sunni and Shia Muslim goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years. But as with all things, I think if you get people in a room talking, in this case, we'd sit down, we'd have tea, and just get to know one another, you'd be surprised what you can accomplish. And I'm not going to say that I turn things around there or anything like that, but I at least got those two sides talking, and I was very happy with that. Near the end of the deployment, two things happened. One, there was an operation called Iron Triangle, in which U.S. soldiers captured some detainees, decided that the detainees needed killing, and so cut their zip ties, told them to run, shot them while they were running, and then made up a phony story that they were shot while trying to escape. The other thing was something called the Mahmudiyya massacre, in which U.S. Army soldiers raped a 14-year-old Iraqi girl, killed her little sister, killed her parents, and then set the bodies on fire to make it seem as though it was an act of the insurgency. There was the Iraqis probably killed each other far more than they killed U.S. service members. And again, it went back to these kind of ancient schisms between Sunni and Shia Muslims, and then also there are a lot of different tribal factions in Iraq, just as there are in Afghanistan. So I was the lead prosecutor on all those cases. I came back from Iraq with 9 murder cases in tow. We obtained convictions on every one of those. I did 1 more year at the appellate division in DC. And after that, I got out. And that was the first I could get out because of a thing called stop loss. I wasn't planning to stay there longer than 3 years, but there's a war, then there's another war, and then the next thing I know, I've been there for almost 9 years, and I'm a major. So got out in 2008. I came back here to Phoenix in 2009, where I joined Tiffany and Bosco. And in many respects, I had to start over. I knew that I could try a case better than virtually any of the partners at that law firm when I got there, but the issue was convincing them of it. So I had to start at the lowest rung again, and I had to work my way up, which, by the way, is fine. I have no issue with proving myself, because if you're really as good as you think you are, they'll see it and they'll notice it pretty quickly. I made it to non-equity partner, and then I think in 2017, I was made an equity partner. So 8 years, considering that I had no real ties here. It was a pretty quick ascension for me to the equity partner level. And again, these days, I have a large litigation team, and we do a little bit of everything. It could be eminent domain, it could be a contract dispute, it could be a partnership dispute, it could be a high dollar wrongful death case. I love the practice of law. You're going to meet a lot of lawyers here that probably aren't terribly happy with their career. The billable hours suck, the hours suck. I love the law. I love the chess game. I love the innovation that goes with all of it. And for those of you that continue on to be lawyers, I hope you find your careers to be just as rewarding, because life is too short to be unhappy in your career. One thing I guess I forgot to mention is that I met my wife in Iraq. She was an Army officer as well. She was a nurse, and I'd see her around the base there in the Cobb Spiker, and I could tell she was medical because of her patch. So I came up with a lot of excuses to go to the hospital. And eventually, for better or worse, and this is kind of macabre, but it's a true story. A soldier by the name of Private Luca got drunk and flipped a Humvee and ejected the passenger. Passenger's spine was severed. And my wife was one of the nurses treating both Private Luca and the passenger. And obviously I prosecuted Private Luca and sent him to jail for that. But that was my end, as I finally got to meet her when I was over there interviewing witnesses for that case. And our first dates were there in Iraq, and we came back and got married a couple years later. Today, she's a nurse practitioner in a different uniform service called the Public Health Service. How many uniform services are there?
Military branches?
Uniform services. Something of a trick question.
Not for sure.
Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, two more. The other two most people don't know about.
Merchant Marine and Space Force?
You're close. Actually, Space Force might be the 8th, actually, now that I think about it, because that's a brand new one. I'm not sure if Space Force if it's sufficiently detached from the Air Force or how that works. You're close on the Merchant Marine. So there's two branches that are their roots are in the seafaring services. There's NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association, and then the Public Health Service. So you all have probably seen the Surgeon General on TV a lot lately. The Surgeon General wears that Navy uniform because he or she is the commander of the Public Health Service. And if you go down to downtown Phoenix, or if you go to the Phoenix Indian Medical Center here on 16th and Indian School, you'll see a lot of people running around in what are essentially Navy uniforms. Those are actually Public Health Service officers. And the reason you're close is because that the Public Health Service and NOAA kind of spun out of the old Merchant Marine, and the idea was to have at least in the case of the Public Health Service, a contingency force of medical professionals that you could deploy for things like earthquakes and hurricanes or an Ebola breakout or something like that. But when they're not doing that, for the most part, a lot of them are manning a lot of the Native American hospitals in the United States. One of the conditions of the treaty that was struck between the United States and the various Native American nations at the end of the 19th century is that they would be provided free healthcare at the cost of the United States government. So here in Arizona, there's probably 4 or 5 really big Indian hospitals. There's one at White River, one for the Toto'odums outside of Tucson, the one here in Phoenix, obviously, and I think there's also a pretty big one in Parker as well, and as well as smaller ones too. So that's really it. I gave you the article there just for your own amusement. Also for your amusement, about 1.5 years ago, I had the opportunity to depose Elon Musk. And I included some of the more amusing parts of the transcript that's filed in district court. It's public, so it's nothing. But you haven't lived as a lawyer until you ask Elon Musk under oath whether or not he's a narcissistic sociopath. I'm probably the only lawyer fortunate enough to have ever done that. So but you can see some of the witty repartee between. It's one thing to match wits with most witnesses. It's another thing to match wits with Elon Musk. So, what questions can I answer for you?
You were talking about how whenever you got out of the JAG court, you kind of had to you were kind of behind, I guess, in a sense. You're not behind, but you had some picking up to do as opposed to your colleagues. Do you think your experience in the military and that development of the leadership definitely made that gap easier to overcome?
It did in many respects, and the magic word you said is leadership. When things go wrong, it's because the leadership went wrong, and that is true in 99.9% of the time. If things go well, it's typically the leadership has a role with it. It's not to say that the folks executing didn't have a role, but there's just no cure for bad leadership, put it that way. Likewise, if you have good leadership, an organization or a team can really do remarkable things. And one of the benefits I had being in the military was you get so many great leadership lessons almost just through osmosis, just by watching it right in front of you. One of the reasons I was able to kind of build a book of business as quickly as I did is I sought out and I held leadership positions. I in addition to being an equity partner in Tiffany and Bosco, I'm the chairman of the board for Goodwill here in Arizona. You know, that's 100 stores, 4,500 employees. It's a matter of public record. We probably brought in annual revenues of over $200 million last year, which again, it's a nonprofit that all goes to our mission of putting people to work and ending poverty through work. But I would not have been able to assume that position, but for the leadership experience the military gave me. I also sit on the vice chair of one of the zoning committees here in Phoenix for my neighborhood. Again, I couldn't do that without that leadership experience. Likewise, I sit on the state bar's rule committee, which is great because it's almost like being an NFL coach and also being on the rules committee. Whenever you join an organization, I would encourage all of you to not just be part of the organization, seek out and achieve a leadership role in the organization. Because as an attorney, people look up there and they see you speaking, they see your poise, they see how you handle yourself. And they say to themselves, that's who I want to be my lawyer. So always seek out leadership opportunities. And if you do, the business and the clients will come. Yes, ma'am.
So you briefly mentioned how you love your career and you know many people who are practicing law that do not. So I was just wondering what advice you would give to us being undergraduate students who are mostly, I would say, interested in law.
Sure.
For us to know that we were going to love this career. or this
Advice other than go sling lattes at Starbucks, you mean? Yeah, I mean, look, the first couple of years are going to suck. They just are. You're going to work hard. You're going to do a lot of thankless work, and you have to accept that and digest it and make the most of it. So don't become deterred or feel disenfranchised because you're not loving it from day one. You're not supposed to love it from day one, but you'll get through it. You'll get through it. And the most important thing, I think, is kind of figuring out what areas of the law interest you, which areas of the law you're passionate about, and then finding a firm that works for you. You know, every lawyer you talk to this semester is going to roll through here and tell you why their law firm's the greatest one, and I'm no different. What I love about Tiffany and Bosco is we have a departmentalized structure where each equity partner is their own profit center, which means the finances are completely transparent. No compensation committee determines what I make. What I make is based off of the revenue that I bring in and the expenses that I pay out, and that delta there, the rest is all mine. And when law firms operate like that, you remove probably 80% of the things that lawyers typically fight about, which is money. And we work our non-equity partners and our associates the same way. It's completely transparent. Their bonuses are based on a percentage of their profitability. And again, once you take out the kind of the hocus pocus that goes into compensation sometimes, and you make everything very transparent, people just tend to get along a lot better. And they tend to be a much better team. But yeah, finding the right firm is very important, and finding the right culture is very important. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was in the Marine Corps as well, so this kind of brought this up. So when you graduate law school or whatever, is there a program in the military to where they'll like reimburse or cover law school tuition?
There is. You probably don't want to do it though. You guys both got the GI Bill, I take it, which, you know, for those of you who don't know, that's about the best deal out there in terms of paying for your education. My wife got 2 graduate degrees with her GI Bill. And you guys, did you get like a living stipend too? And you get like E5, you know, pay or something like that? It's a great deal, and you don't need to be in the infantry to get it. You could be the kid that strings Cat 6 cable in the battalion headquarters, and your GI Bill works the same exact way. So you guys are probably covered in that regard. But there is a program, it's called FLEP, Funded Legal Education Program. All the branches have it. But the idea is you go in as a regular commissioned officer doing whatever, infantry, artillery, signal, logistics. And then after 3 years, you're eligible to apply to the FLEP program. And if you are accepted, You go to law school, by that time, you'd probably be an O2 or an O3. So probably a first lieutenant or a captain. And that's your duty station, was law school for 3 years. You're paid as an O3 to go to law school for 3 years. The trade-off is by the time you, for every year the military pays for in terms of your education, you owe 2. So by the time you go through the FLEP program, by the time you get through law school, and by the time you pay back the 6 years, so to speak, you're probably already at 12 years right there. For you two guys, probably with time in service, you're probably at almost like 14 or 15 years. So, at that point, just, head for daylight and retire at 20. So, but yeah, it's a very competitive program. And then, oh, by the way, if you don't pass the bar after 2 tries, you go back to your old branch.
Thank you.
You had a question?
Yeah, I'm a little curious about the JAG Corps itself. Firstly, what are the main sort of law areas that are mostly practiced? And second of all, how compartmentalized is it? It sounded like you had like a lot of different areas you could, practice in, but is that the norm, or is normally your one kind, your defense criminal law, and that's it?
It's a very good question. So, for the people that stay kind of career officers in the JAG Corps, your goal is to become what's called the staff judge advocate, which is the chief lawyer for a division or a corps or something like that. Which means you kind of have to be a bit of a generalist. You have to know a little bit of everything about the laws as it applies to the military. The key areas are obviously military justice is a big one, but it's not the only one. Administrative law is huge. Whether or not and part of that is what we call fiscal law. Congress appropriates money for very specific purposes, and if you don't use it for the purpose they appropriated it for, they'd like to have a word with you. And it's usually the kind that ends in a career-ending reprimand. So you have to be very vigilant on spending the money properly. And so you'll get questions like, well, the general's wife wants to put on a tea club or something like that. Can she use operational dollars to do that? Or if so, do we have to get some other type of funding? Or you can't use basic operational dollars for what I would call, construction projects. And then I once knew a lawyer who they wanted to, I think the goal was to buy like like this, where the football team kind of practices, that kind of indoor kind of field over there off of, I want to say rural. The commander wanted to buy one of those, but it cost $1 million, and he was limited to $500,000. So they found a way to basically buy this thing in 2 different halves. And so, we'll spend $500,000 on this half and $500,000 on the other half. And, as long as they never figure out that we're going to put the 2 together, we're home free. and it's kind of that creative. There's the operational law, which again, law of war, Geneva Conventions, that's very big, especially when you're dealing with just not only just detainee operations, but just, kinetic operations in general, because, it's typically not very difficult to get a general idea of where the bad guys are. You could probably say, okay, we know they're in this city or they're in this neighborhood. But being more precise than that is very hard. It requires people basically going door to door, and that is in and of itself dangerous. And so you say, well, why don't we just rain fire upon the whole place? Well, you can't do that. There's a disproportionate effect on the civilian population, and to the extent you believe you're trying to enlist the aid of the civilian population in kind of a counterinsurgency type situation, that's exactly the last thing you want to do is be indiscriminate about the use of force. Now, force has to be used. That's what the military does. It's there to break things and kill people. But you have to be judicious in the use of that force. And the lawyer doesn't have veto authority. The commander is the one that makes the ultimate call there. But sometimes you have to make some very, I think, challenging decisions about, to what extent there's going to be kind of a civilian loss of life here, and is it outweighed by the military gain? The Bin Laden rate's probably a good example of that. I don't think anybody would have batted an eyelash if they just dropped a daisy cutter on the whole thing and called it a day. think the challenge there is you weren't going to be, you weren't really sure if you actually got who you wanted to get. Because it would, you could vaporize the place, but then how would you tell whether or not bin Laden was really there? I'm trying to think if there's any other major areas. I think those are the big ones. There's some environmental law, although there's also, that's mainly handled by the civilian attorneys that work with the Army. But yeah, the military is, they tend to impact the environment wherever they go. I'll just leave it at that. So, there's actually quite a bit of environmental law at work there as well. Yes, sir.
So, and you mentioned this in passing, but there's been a lot of discussion at the political level of how commanding officers can or cannot influence JAG. How do you see that working in on the ground? And is there a better way? Do we do it best? What's your prescription?
Yeah, and I think it's a good question. A lot of those discussions typically come up in the context of sexual assault prosecutions. I can tell you that, when I was there, we all took those deadly seriously. The commanders all took them deadly seriously. And frankly, I think folks that were suggesting otherwise were kind of had their own agendas. We would take even the flimsiest of sexual assault cases to at least what's called an Article 32, which is effectively a grand jury hearing. Although with the Article 32, the defense gets to show up, cross-examine witnesses, and do things like that. Whether or not, it went past that was oftentimes a matter of discretion, but you always did the investigation. You always took it seriously. I can think of one occasion where I got some pushback from a commander. It was in one of the aviation brigades. One of the PAs there had essentially sexually assaulted a female soldier during a pelvic exam. I was like, we have to prefer charges. And the aviation commander was like, I'm in Iraq. This is my only PA. What am I going to do without him? And I was like, that's the wrong answer. So I went over his head and I went to the commanding general and I said, we have to fucking do this. And I won that fight. I think that the problem is kind of overstated. We always took those very, very seriously. I think another kind of complaint people have is that, well, sometimes you would, people are accused of sexual assault and they get out in administrative discharges. Yeah. And the reason is sometimes the evidence sucks. The evidence is terrible. Both people were drinking. There's evidence that, it might have been kind of a drunken hookup, so to speak. And what would you rather do? Would you rather have a suspected rapist still in the unit, or would you rather just get him out of the unit, even if it means an administrative discharge? I vote for the administrative discharge. I don't want rapists or potential rapists around my soldiers. But again, people complain about that as though it's people getting off too easy, and it's typically the evidence isn't good enough to make the prosecution stick. So we go the lesser route of the administrative discharge, which they really can't stop.
I know you mentioned that you and your team practice a wide variety of cases, but do you have a favorite practice area or favorite type of case?
Probably two. One, I like eminent domain. You guys know what that is? It's eminent domain, or sometimes called condemnation. It's where the state takes personal property for public use. So, when they built the 202 loop around South Mountain, they had to condemn property for that. And, a lot of people that owned, and there's mainly agricultural land up there. So, people that had alfalfa fields and dairies and stuff like that, the state came through and took a piece of their property. And there was typically a fight over the value. Believe it or not, the government doesn't pay you top dollar. I know you might find that shocking, but it's very creative. Mind if I write on this here?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so again, I'm that alfalfa farmer, right? I've got this, 100-acre piece of land out there in South Phoenix. And, I'm doing pretty good on it. There's a nearby dairy that uses all the alfalfa. The property's paid off. But the real value there is I'm getting ready to sell that to a home builder. I'm going to sell that to, a KB Homes or something like that. They're going to buy it from me and they're going to put in a wonderful master plan subdivision with a community center and 200 houses. And there's going to be a little gas station here with some retail and maybe a Safeway over there. So this is primo real estate here. Then ADOT comes along and says, guess what? We're going to build the freeway through your property. And oh, by the way, it's going to be this kind of weird thing like this. Right, okay, so they take this. Okay, they've got to pay you for that, obviously, right? On a price per square foot basis. Typically, it'd be valued at what you would, you figure out, okay, what would you sell this whole thing to a home builder for? And then you break it down in terms of this little sliver here, and that's what you get paid for. But the more concerning part is what's called severance damages, meaning this piece and this piece are now less valuable because of this. And this is where the creativity comes in, it is on severance damages. I'll actually give you another example. It's actually a case I'm working right now with SRP. I have a client that owns a nursery out in Queen Creek, and they supply bougainvilleas and hibiscus plants and other things to all the Costco's and Home Depots in about 8 states. So this operation here, it's about, I want to say it's 230 acres, and it actually is a kind of a perfect square. And it's all completely state of the art with greenhouses and drip systems, all completely automated. They've got a bunch of reclamation ponds over here. So when the water is used, it's then recycled, and it's just an ingenious operation in terms of not only producing massive amounts of these plants, which are selling like crazy these days as everybody improves their homes during the lockdown, but it's also super water efficient. Right here is a pumping station. This is like the guts of the operation. It's again completely automated, and all the water for this entire thing passes through this building here. And all over here, there's like a bunch of greenhouses and other things like that, and various other little things here. SRP comes in and says, guess what? We're going to put an electric line through your property. Guess where the electrical line is going to go? The worst possible place, which is right here. So we basically have to rip this thing out and replumb this entire property. And it's like the equivalent of, taking your beating heart out of your chest and relocating it to the vicinity of your appendix. It's not easy. And for us to do this, probably going to be at least $15 or $20 million because it's that complicated. But this is interesting stuff to me. The other stuff I like is the high-end personal injury stuff, the wrongful death cases. Those are just, those are just always interesting because although this work I typically take on a hourly fee basis, my typical rate's $4.15 an hour, $4.50 if it's kind of premium work. All the personal injury stuff I do on a contingent fee basis. So, the hourly work keeps the lights on, and the contingent fee work pays for the vacations. And so, when you got skin in the game, that makes it really fun. And because of our financial model, and again, because of our profit center structure, some days I do very well. Just leave it at that. Yes.
At this point in your career, how many hours a week do you work on average?
Well, define work. When you start as an attorney, and kind of depending on what practice you're in, and what kind of firm you're in. So I think for the associates in our firm, we're at about 155 a month is the expectation, which is very doable, by the way. If you work for an insurance defense law firm like a Jones Skelton or something like that, they're like 200 a month. And I assure you that they're not staying much longer than we are. They're just kind of inflating their bills. But that's because insurance companies, they pay, they're stingy. Insurance companies don't get big and rich by paying their lawyers a lot of money. Again, typically I'm $4.15 an hour. An insurance company would probably pay me $2.25 an hour, which again, that's not that doesn't appeal to me, leave it that way, put it that way. So depending on the kind of firm, it might kind of impact that. But as you grow, and particularly as you get other people that work for you, again, you're not doing the work so much as you're supervising the work. You're directing traffic and you're answering stupid questions. But more importantly, you're marketing. I probably go to lunch 3 or 4 times a week. I go to happy hour 3 to 4 times a week. And these are all business development or dinner. These are all business development opportunities. They're existing clients. They're what I would call referral sources, which are key people in the community that send me clients. And look, I enjoy having lunch at Hillstone and Capitol Grill as much as the next person. But that's part of the job is, there's one thing you need to be a lawyer. You know what that is? Client. And clients don't just show up willy-nilly. You've got to go out there, you can get them, you got to go out there and earn them. So when I kind of chuckled at that question, because I probably billed 40 hours last month, maybe 50. It's not to say I'm not working my butt off. I am, but it's doing other things. I hope that answers your question. I don't mean to be cute about it. It's just, as you evolve in your career, the work you do and the nature of the work tends to change as well. Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts on advertising, or do you advertise? And I guess in general, like say I'm driving down Camelback or Indian School Road and I see billboards or signs with law groups. Do you think that dilutes the work you do?
No, I mean, most of those are personal injury firms, and they're kind of the high volume ones. I actually ran into, you guys, Lerner and Rowe, you guys know Lerner and Rowe. I ran into Kevin Rowe the other day at the bar at Capitol Grill, and I just walked up to him and I said, I'd just love to take you to dinner and pick your brain, because, make fun of those guys all you want. They're making a lot of money. They have a different business model than I do. They work on volume. They've got an army of paralegals writing demand letters to insurance companies, and maybe 2 lawyers that look at this stuff. They probably rarely take anything to trial. If it's going to trial, you probably farm it out to a different firm, because the second the jury hears Lerner and Rowe, that game over. Those types of law firms, and again, it's a business model. It doesn't mean that they're not good lawyers or that they're not smart. They're actually probably pretty ingenious, especially those 2. But every business model kind of, works a little bit differently. Whether or not it dilutes the brand of lawyers, yeah, I guess it does. People joke about, if I had a nickel for every stupid lawyer joke I've heard, I could buy everybody in the room cheeseburgers tonight. But that's okay. What's most important is that you're out there building your brand, and your kind of personal image of what kind of attorney you are. I don't advertise. I don't need to advertise. And I say that maybe kind of in a cocky way, but I don't advertise because I bust my butt being out there in the community and working clients that way. But again, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and I have no ill will towards the Glenn Lerners and Kevin Rose of the world. Yes.
Did you get your JD and MBA at the same time?
I did. And I think back then that was actually kind of a new thing. I think these days it's pretty common. I'd recommend it. It's helpful as an attorney if you can, read a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement, because more often than not, at least particularly with what I do, my clients are other businesses. And if you can kind of speak their language, that's helpful to you.
All right, well, we're coming up to 7, so maybe one more question if anyone had one they wanted to ask. All right, if not, I'm gonna go ahead and ask, so how'd you come to depose Elon Musk? How'd that happen?
Well, the case was in the news for a while. We had a client named Martin Tripp, who was an employee at so Tesla makes its batteries at it's called the Gigafactory outside of Reno, Nevada. Tripp was an employee there at the Gigafactory, and he decided that the batteries were both unsafe and that Tesla was being wasteful in how it was manufacturing them. And there was probably some merit to that. On the one hand, if you're like Ford Motor Company or Toyota, if your scrap level at a factory is above 5%, you're getting fired. The scrap level at the Gigafactory was probably like 70%. Now, if you're Tesla, you've got money to burn, kind of doesn't matter. And Musk would tell you, look, that's because we're innovators. We're doing it differently than other car companies. And so, yeah, we're going to have more scrap than your traditional car maker, which, by the way, it's not a bad explanation for that. As far as unsafe, at one point it happened is you got this like robot that would pick up the batteries and, move them over here like this. And there was a pin on kind of the little robot hands there that gradually became unthreaded. So every time the robot would pick up one of the batteries, it would puncture the battery cell. And so they supposedly located all these and then went and fixed all of them with kind of some type of epoxy solution. If you look in the news every now and then, like a Tesla battery will just kind of spontaneously go up in flames. And so I could understand why somebody might think like that's probably not a great way to fix the batteries, is to kind of, put a coat of epoxy over it, because a bunch of these made these into Tesla cars. So anyway, Tripp goes to the press as an anonymous leaker and tells his tale of waste and total disregard for customer safety, as he put it. Tesla deploys like a crack team of investigators who are able to locate him. They're able to backwards engineer everything that's gone on in the Gigafactory for the past 3 months, and they figure out it's him. He confesses, he gets fired. The day he gets fired, Tesla's call center in Las Vegas receives an anonymous call saying that Mr. Tripp is a very angry person, and oh, by the way, he owns lots of guns. Tesla's PR office then spins that into saying that we received a call from a friend of Mr. Tripp's who said that Mr. Tripp was heavily armed and he's on the way to the Gigafactory right now to shoot up the place. Elon Musk was the first one to actually unleash that story in the press. He was chatting with somebody, I think, from The Guardian. Needless to say, my client wasn't heading to the Gigafactory. They found him outside the Nugget Casino in Reno. He was crying and feeling like he'd thrown his life away. So Tesla sues him for $167 million in trade secrets damages. The theory of Tesla's case was that during the 2 days that the news stories with his leaked information went out, Tesla stock price is kind of doing one of those. And then maybe just before the closing bell, it kind of would do like a little dip. And this little dip is maybe like 25 cents. Well, if you multiply that times the $167 million, or not, was it the total number of outstanding Tesla shares at the time, which is something like, a couple 100 million shares, times a quarter on 2 different days, that's how they got $167 million. Now, never mind the fact that the next day the NASDAQ opened up, the stock price was already back up there again, and it was completely contrived. We countersued for defamation based on the claim that he was on the way to shoot up the Gigafactory. We beat Tesla on this number here. The court dismissed our defamation case on summary judgment, claiming that the call was close enough. Somebody said that he was armed and was angry, and that's close enough to saying that he's on his way to the Gigafactory to shoot people. I think we would have won that on appeal. Mr. Tripp unfortunately decided to terminate our services so that he could go public with his story, because most of everything in the case was under seal. What I gave you there is public record. It's not under seal. But so we didn't wind up appealing it. I think we would have won the appeal. But that's why I got to depose Elon Musk. Interesting postscript to the anonymous call. When you call the call center, what's the first thing you hear? This call will be recorded for. Guess whose call recording equipment had been busted for 6 months? Yeah, So there's no record of the call, no caller ID. Theories have abounded that it was one of Mr. Musk's henchmen that made the call, but who knows? That's all speculation. So that's how I got to depose Elon Musk. And again, you know, it was for all the firepower in that case, when both sides basically got nothing out of it. It was still a great experience because it helped me kind of up my game. You know, I knew that if I could take on Tesla's lawyers, I could take on anybody. And that kind of goes into another point, which is always seek out challenges, because by doing things that kind of scare you, you become a much better person. And there's nothing wrong with being scared by it. You know, everybody here watched Game of Thrones. What Ben says to Bran in the first episode, which is, you know, you can't be brave unless you're scared in the first place. So, you know, doing things that you find both challenging and, you know, might maybe a little unnerving at first, you know, make you a better attorney and a better person overall.
Well, fantastic. Let's give Mr. Fischbach a round of applause. Thank you, sir. It's great to have you.
No, thank you. I hope I didn't scare you, and I hope you'll invite me back at some point. You know, you can find me online. If you have any questions, I'm always happy to answer them. I'm the kind of person that if somebody wants to, like, you know, meet for coffee or something, I'm always happy to do it. Part of being a leader is giving back, you know, and someday all of you will be in my position someday. And I hope that's how you comport yourselves, is because there's a lot of young people out there that need good advice. And I'm not saying I'm giving good advice, I'm giving advice. But I'm always happy to do it. So always feel free to pick up the phone or shoot me an email.
Awesome. And if you look right there, Laura got you a little present from the alumni office.
Oh, you're too kind. Thank you so much. Well, again, guys, this has been a real pleasure. And I wish all of you the best of luck in your careers, be it as attorneys or something else. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Well, it's getting to 7, so of course, everyone wants to get home. I'll let you all go. So next week, we'll meet Wednesday again. We'll give a more full spiel. I'll give you the list of every single speaker we're going to have throughout the semester, all of our other events. We'll get to know each other a bit better. I want to go up to be a bit more personal, a bit more social. So that's what we're going to do next week. And then the week after, which is our next speaker meeting, we're going to have Ms. Twyla Haggerty. DJ, you're the one that got her. Can you tell them a little bit about her?
Yeah, so she is a lawyer for a nonprofit that works with women and children of abuse and among like other things, but specifically women and children. Yeah.
Yep, so that'll be our next speaker. You don't want to miss that. So everyone have a good one. It was nice to meet all of you.
If anyone didn't sign in, just come over to the computer.